My brother's voice carried across the conference room the way voices do when someone wants the whole floor to hear. "She's never been responsible for anything in her life," he said. "Not once." The attorney looked down at his papers. The paralegal beside him suddenly found something very interesting to study on the wall. My mother turned her face toward the window. My father sat with his arms crossed, not disagreeing. I didn't respond. I folded my hands on the table and kept my eyes level. Then the door opened. The county clerk stepped in quietly and leaned down to whisper something to the attorney. I watched the man's expression shift. He looked at the paper in the clerk's hand. Then he looked at me, then back at the paper. His posture changed the way posture changes when someone realizes they've been standing in the wrong room. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said slowly, looking at my brother. "Do you know what your sister actually does for a living?" My brother paused. He stopped. His jaw stayed open for a half second. "She travels. She works some kind of government job." The attorney set the paper down and turned it so the room could see the letterhead. That moment didn't come from nowhere. It started 8 months earlier, on a Tuesday in February, when I got a phone call from a number I almost didn't answer. I had been in the middle of a debrief in a hotel conference room in Sacramento, still in my gear, still with dust in my hair from a collapsed structure in Yolo County, when my phone buzzed across the table. I glanced at the screen. Tennessee area code. I stepped outside the room, and when I answered, my aunt's voice came through, thin and careful. "Claire," she said, "I'm calling because your grandfather passed away this morning." I stood in the carpeted hallway with the hum of the hotel ice machine a few feet away, and I let that sentence settle. My grandfather, Walter Dawson, had been the only person in my family who ever asked me about my work without flinching. He used to call me on Sunday evenings. He'd say, "Tell me something you saw this week." And I would. Not the classified parts, not the things that couldn't leave the debrief room, but the human parts, the things that mattered. He never told me to be careful the way everyone else did. He used to say, "You do what you were made to do." I told my aunt I'd be there in 4 days. I had to finish the debrief, file the incident reports, and get my team squared away before I could board a plane home to Grayson Creek, Tennessee. I hadn't been back in 3 years. Grayson Creek is the kind of town that gets smaller every time you leave it and come back. The same hardware store on the corner of Route 11. The same barbershop with the faded striped pole. The same row of booths at Patty's Diner where the same group of men sat every morning talking about football, weather, and whoever had just listed their property for sale. I parked my rental car on Main Street on a Thursday morning and sat there for a moment with the engine running. The February air outside looked gray and cold. Through the diner window, I could see people moving around with coffee cups. I went inside. The bell above the door hadn't changed. Neither had the smell, coffee, and bacon grease, and the particular warmth of a place that's been heated by a gas range for 40 years. Patty herself was behind the counter, which surprised me. She had to be close to 70. She looked up when the bell rang, squinted for half a second, and then her face opened into recognition. "Claire Dawson," she said. "Morning, Patty." She had a mug in front of me before I'd finished sitting down. "I heard about your grandfather," she said quietly. "He was a good man." He was. She leaned against the counter the way she always had when she was about to say something she'd been turning over in her mind. "Your brother's been in here a few times this week," she said. "Him and your daddy." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, I figured. She studied my face the way she used to when I was 17 and pretending everything was fine. Patty had always been able to see through that particular act. "How long you staying?" she asked. "As long as I need to." She nodded and moved down the counter to refill someone else's cup, but I caught her glance back once, something quietly protective in it. I had not spoken to my brother in 14 months. The last conversation we'd had ended when he told me that the way I was living, moving from city to city, never settling, no husband, no house, nothing to show for it, was selfish. That I had left the family to manage everything while I chased whatever it was I was chasing. I didn't argue. I just stopped calling. He wasn't entirely wrong about the leaving part. I had left Grayson Creek at 22 with a degree in civil engineering and a job offer from a federal contractor nobody in town had heard of. Within 2 years, I was cross-training with a FEMA Urban Search and Rescue Task Force. Within 4, I was leading deployments. The work took me places that didn't make sense to describe on Christmas calls. Building collapses in the Pacific Northwest. A chemical plant incident in Louisiana. Hurricanes, floods, a wildfire in Northern California where we spent 11 days in terrain that didn't have a name on most maps. The job required a kind of focus that didn't leave much room for the slow pace of home, for Sunday dinners and birthday parties, and the ongoing conversation about whose kid was doing what. My family didn't know most of it, not because I was hiding anything, but because every time I tried to explain, my brother would change the subject, or my mother would get a worried look and say, "But are you safe?" in a tone that wasn't really a question. After a while, I stopped trying to explain. And after I stopped explaining, they filled in the silence with their own version of who I was. The estate attorney's name was Gordon Abel. He had an office above the pharmacy on Jefferson Street, 2 small rooms with oak-paneled walls and a window that looked out over the parking lot. My grandfather's will was not complicated. He had owned a small piece of land on the eastern edge of the county, 22 acres with a pond and an old equipment barn, and a savings account that had been quietly growing for 30 years. He had left the land to me. My grandfather had told me once, when I was about 16 and sitting with him on the tailgate of his truck out by that pond, that the land was the one thing in his life that had never asked anything of him. "You can just be there," he said. "It doesn't need you to perform." I understood that then. I understood it more now. When I arrived at Gordon Abel's office on Friday morning, my brother and his wife were already seated. My parents came in a few minutes later. Nobody hugged me. My mother said hello and smoothed her coat. My father nodded. My brother, whose name is Daniel, looked at me the way he looks at things he's already decided about. Gordon Abel read the will clearly and professionally. He was good at his job, calm, organized, no wasted words. When he read the part about the land, I heard my brother exhale sharply through his nose. After Gordon finished, my brother leaned forward. "That's not right," he said. Gordon looked at him. "The will is legally. I'm not saying it's not legal." My brother's voice had that particular edge it gets when he's been storing something up. "I'm saying it's not fair. I have been here. I drove Dad to his doctor appointments. My wife organized the meals when Grandpa got sick. Claire wasn't here for any of that." He turned to look at me directly. "You were never here," he said. "You haven't been here for years, and now you're going to take the land." His wife nodded slightly beside him. My mother looked at the window again. My father rubbed his knee. I didn't speak. "I know you think that's fine," my brother continued, his voice rising just enough. "I know you've decided that your life out there is more important, that we're just background, that you can show up for the will reading and that's enough." Gordon Abel cleared his throat gently. My brother wasn't done. "She's never committed to anything. Not this family, not this town. She left and she just keeps leaving." He looked at Gordon. "I want to contest it." Gordon said carefully that contesting a will required specific legal grounds and that he would need to file separately. "Then that's what we'll do," my brother said. My mother finally looked at me. Her expression wasn't angry. It was something more tired and complicated than anger. She said, "It's not that we don't love you, Claire." Then she paused like she wasn't sure what came next. My brother said it for her. "It's that you've never acted like you love us." The room stayed quiet for a moment. I thought about 14 different things I could have said. I thought about the phone calls I'd made from dusty trucks and temporary command posts and hospital waiting rooms in 3 different states. I thought about the postcard I'd sent my grandfather from every deployment, which he'd kept in a coffee can on his kitchen windowsill. I thought about the money I'd quietly sent home twice when I knew my parents were having a hard year, money I'd never mentioned and they'd never asked about. I said none of it. Instead I said, "Okay." My brother blinked. "Okay? If you want to contest it, contest it." He stared at me for a moment like he was waiting for more. I didn't offer more. Gordon Abel glanced between us and suggested everyone take a few days before making further decisions. We filed out into the gray February morning, and my family walked to their cars without saying goodbye, and I stood on the sidewalk and watched them go. 2 weeks later, the formal dispute paperwork arrived. I didn't get a local attorney. I had learned something over the years that most people don't learn until much later. When the truth is on your side, you don't need to dress it up. You just need to show up and let it stand on its own. The hearing was set for a Thursday in March, in the Claiborne County Probate Court, same courthouse where my grandfather had filed his business taxes for 40 years. I drove there alone in the gray morning light. I wore a plain, dark blazer. I brought a folder with documents I'd organized the night before at the kitchen table of my grandfather's house, where I'd been staying since I arrived. The courtroom smelled like old wood and radiator heat. People from town had come, which surprised me, and also didn't. Small places don't need a reason to show up for something like this. A family dispute in probate court is Tuesday entertainment. My brother and his wife sat on one side with an attorney named Marcy Lund, who had a reputation in the county for being thorough. My parents sat just behind them. My brother had cut his hair since the office meeting. He looked formal and prepared. I sat alone at the opposite table. Marcy Lund glanced at me when I came in. "You're representing yourself?" she asked, not unkindly. "Yes," she nodded slowly, the way people nod when they've already formed an opinion but are too professional to say it. The judge's name was Patricia Holloway. She had been on the bench in Claiborne County for over a decade, a compact woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of measured calm that comes from years of listening to people argue about money and family. She didn't waste time. Marcy Lund opened with a careful, competent presentation. She talked about presence and responsibility, about who had been there for Walter Dawson in his final years, about the nature of family obligations. She spoke about my brother's consistent involvement, doctor appointments, holidays, repairs on the old equipment barn. She didn't say anything false. It was all true. My brother had been present. He had helped. That part wasn't the lie. The lie was in what got left out. Then she turned to me, and her tone shifted just slightly. "Just enough. The respondent," she said, "has been absent from this family for years. There is no record of consistent visits. She did not attend her grandfather's final hospitalization. She has not maintained a stable residence in this county or contributed to the upkeep of the estate." My father shifted in his seat. He was staring at the floor. Marcy Lund continued, "We are not questioning her grandfather's affection for her. We are questioning whether that affection was based on an accurate picture of who she has chosen to be." She sat down. Judge Holloway made a note on her pad. "Mr. Dawson," she said to my brother, "would you like to speak?" My brother stood. He spoke with the steady rhythm of someone who had rehearsed. He talked about the years, about how he'd learned not to expect Claire at things, how his kids barely knew their aunt, how their parents had quietly stopped mentioning my name in certain contexts because it made everyone uncomfortable. He was speaking his truth. I understood that. It was just a small truth inside a larger one he didn't have all the information to see yet. Then he said, "She's always done exactly what she wanted, regardless of the cost to anyone else. That's who she's chosen to be." He looked at me for a moment. A person who only shows up when there's something to gain. That sentence settled into the room the way those sentences do, not with a crack, but with a slow weight. Judge Holloway looked at me. "Miss Dawson, you may respond." I stood. The courtroom was quiet. I could hear someone breathing 2 rows behind me. "Your Honor," I said, "my grandfather left me the land because we had a relationship that was consistent and real. I have documentation of that." I opened my folder and passed a set of papers to the clerk. Letters, phone records, and financial transfers to my grandfather over the past 6 years. None of it was announced. He asked me not to make a thing of it. Marcy Lund interjected quietly. "Financial transfers don't substitute for presence." "They don't," I agreed. "But they do demonstrate that I wasn't absent. I was involved in a different way." My brother made a quiet sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I kept my voice even. "I'm not here to argue about who loved our grandfather more. I don't think that's a useful argument." He made his wishes clear in writing. "I'm asking the court to honor them." I sat down. Judge Holloway leaned back slightly and looked at the documents the clerk had brought to her. The room was very still. She turned a page, then another. On the 3rd page, she paused the way people pause when they've found something they weren't looking for. She looked up at me over the rim of her reading glasses, then down at the page again, then back up. She said, "Miss Dawson, is this your federal employment verification?" "Yes, Your Honor." She turned the document slightly so the clerk could see it. Then she looked at Marcy Lund. "Counselor, are you familiar with your opposing party's occupation?" Marcy Lund frowned. "I understand she works in some kind of government contract role." "That's not what this says." Judge Holloway set the document flat on her desk. "Miss Dawson," she said, How long have you been with FEMA's Urban Search and Rescue Program? The room went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. 7 years, I said. Judge Holloway nodded slowly. And in what capacity? I'm a task force leader. I manage a 60-person team during federal disaster deployments. Behind me, I heard the room shift. A chair creaked. Someone murmured something low. My brother had turned to look at me. His expression wasn't angry anymore. It was something I hadn't seen on his face in a long time, complete uncertainty. Judge Holloway read from the document. She read the name of the task force. She read the regions of deployment. Then she stopped at something and was quiet for a moment. Miss Dawson, she said, were you the incident commander for the Hartley Creek flood response? In August, 2 years ago? The room went completely still. I said yes. Hartley Creek was 40 minutes from where we were sitting. The flood had come fast, the way hill country floods do. 12 people had been reported trapped in a collapsed grain facility on the edge of the county. The local response had been overwhelmed within hours. FEMA had activated our task force out of Nashville. We'd worked through 2 nights in water up to our waists in debris-filled current. All 12 people had come out alive. I knew from the sound of the room that people were making connections. Small places remember things like that. They remember the names in the newspaper and the photographs of the rescue boats and the family members crying on the banks of flooded roads. They remember the face of the woman in the yellow helmet on the cover of the Knoxville paper. An older man in the 3rd row removed his cap. My brother was staring at me like I was someone he had never met. My mother had both hands pressed against her mouth. Judge Holloway folded her hands together. I don't make it a practice to comment on a person's profession in a probate matter, she said carefully. But when character is being questioned in this courtroom, context is relevant. She looked at my brother, then at my parents, then at Marcy Lund. Counselor, she said, do you have any further arguments to present? Marcy Lund was quiet for a moment. Your Honor, she said, while Miss Dawson's service record is admirable, the legal question is still. The legal question, Judge Holloway said quietly, is whether there are grounds to contest a valid will. And I have reviewed this will, and this documentation, and I do not find those grounds here. She paused. The will stands as written. The property belongs to Miss Dawson. The gavel came down once. My brother sat down slowly, like the air had gone out of him. His wife put a hand on his arm. My parents hadn't moved. The courtroom began to empty. I gathered my papers carefully, the way I always gather my things after a debrief, slow, methodical, like the work still matters even after the call is closed. Around me, people rose and shuffled toward the door. I heard whispers. The older man with the cap passed my table on his way out. He stopped for a moment. My cousin was in that facility, he said quietly. Hartley Creek. He held my gaze for a second. Thank you, I nodded. When I looked up, the room was nearly empty. My brother and his wife were still seated. His attorney had gone. My parents were standing near the back, not moving toward the door, not moving toward me, just standing. I should have left. The practical part of me, the part that had learned to disengage cleanly after difficult situations, said to pick up the folder and walk out. Give everyone space. Let the dust settle. But something about the stillness in that room kept me in my chair. My brother spoke first. His voice was different than it had been all morning. Quieter, like something had been turned down. Hartley Creek, he said. Yes. He was looking at the table in front of him. That was on the news for days. It was. He was quiet for a moment. I watched some of that footage. He looked up at me slowly. I didn't know that was you. I said nothing. You never said anything about that. You didn't ask, I said. Not with any anger in it. Not with any sharpness. It was just what was true. He absorbed that. I watched him absorb it. My brother is not a mean person. He is not someone who wakes up in the morning deciding to cause harm. He is someone who had been telling a story about his family for years, and the story had a villain in it, and the villain had my name, and now the story didn't fit anymore, and he didn't know what to do with the pieces. I didn't know what you did, he said finally. I thought. He stopped. I guess I filled in the blank. You did, I said. His wife said gently, we all did. My mother had walked down from the back of the room. She stood beside the end of the table, holding her purse with both hands. Her eyes were red, Not from crying, just from the effort of holding things back. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked. I thought about how to answer that honestly. Every time I tried to explain the work, I said, it turned into a conversation about whether I was safe, or why I couldn't find something closer to home, or when I was going to settle down. I looked at her. After a while, I stopped starting that conversation. She didn't argue with that. She stood there looking at me with something complicated on her face, something that might have been recognition of her own part in it. My father had come down too. He looked older than I remembered. He stood next to my mother and cleared his throat the way he does when he's about to say something he's had to work himself up to. "I knew you were doing something with emergency management," he said. I didn't follow up on what that meant. "No," I said. "You didn't." He stopped. Started again. "That was wrong of me. A father should know what his child does." Those were not easy words for my father. I understood that. He was not a man who reviewed his own failures out loud without significant effort, and he was doing it in a courthouse with strangers walking past the open doors. I said, "I should have pushed harder too." My brother looked up from the table. "The things I said in that office," he said, "and in here today." He shook his head. "That wasn't I was building a case. I was angry, but I shouldn't have." "I know," I said. "I should have asked." He said it quietly, like he was trying the words out to see how they felt. "I should have asked you years ago what you actually did every day." "Yeah." His wife reached over and touched his hand. The courtroom was empty now except for us. Through the tall windows, the March light had shifted, paler and softer than the morning. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed. My brother stood. For a moment, he looked at me without saying anything, just looking. The way you look at someone you're relearning after a long time. "The land," he said. "What are you going to do with it?" "I want to fix up the barn," I said. "Grandpa's equipment is still in there. Some of it's worth saving." He nodded slowly. "The roof on that barn has been leaking for 2 years. "I know. I'm going to fix it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know how to do roof work." I looked at him. "I'm not offering to negotiate anything," he said quickly. "That's done. I'm just saying if you want help with the barn, I know what I'm doing." I studied his face. He wasn't maneuvering. He was the same boy who had helped our grandfather stack hay bales every August until he was old enough to drive. The same person who learned every repair job in that family because someone had to learn them. He was offering the only bridge he knew how to build. "That would be useful," I said. My mother exhaled. It was the smallest sound, but I heard it. She said, "I could bring lunch." I looked at her. She was trying very hard not to make it into more than it was. Just a practical offer. Just food on a workday. Which was exactly the right way to offer it. "Sunday?" I said. "Sunday," she said. We walked out of the courthouse together, which was not something I had planned on when I walked in. The air outside was sharp and cold and smelled like thawing ground. My brother held the door for our mother without being asked, which he had always done. On the courthouse steps, we paused and looked out at Main Street, at Patty's Diner across the way, where I could see movement through the window. At the same hardware store on the corner, the same pharmacy, the same geography of a life I had grown up in and then grown out of and then circled back to without quite meaning to. My father put his hands in his coat pockets. "That judge," he said, "she knew who you were before today." "I don't know that," I said. "She looked at you different when she read that paperwork." He glanced at me sideways, like she already had an opinion. "Maybe." He nodded slowly. "You've done good work out there." It was 4 words, said without elaboration, without drama. My father has never been a man of elaborate expressions. 4 words from him carry what other people need a paragraph to say. I said, "Thank you." We separated in the parking lot. My brother lifted a hand when he got to his truck. My parents drove away in the direction of their house on the other side of town. I stood by my rental car for a moment, not quite ready to get in. Down the block, the door to Patty's Diner opened, and she stepped out onto the sidewalk, drying her hands on a dish towel. She had a clear view of the courthouse steps. She looked at me across the distance. "How'd it go?" she called. "Fine," I said. She nodded like she already knew. "Come in for pie before you head back," she said, and went inside. I did. I sat at the counter for an hour that afternoon, and Patty brought cherry pie without asking, and we talked about nothing important, which is its own kind of important. The following Sunday, I was up on the barn roof by 8 in the morning. The weather had cleared, and the light came in clean and cold across the fields my grandfather had mowed every summer until his knees gave out. From up there, you could see the pond. You could see the old fence line he'd repaired with whatever wire was available. You could see the whole shape of the property in a way you couldn't from the ground. I heard the truck before I saw it. My brother pulled in just after 9, his wife with him, their 2 kids in the back seat. He stepped out and looked up at the roof with his hand shielding his eyes. "You started without me," he said. "You were late," he laughed. It was the first time I'd heard him laugh in years. He reached into the truck bed and pulled out his toolbox. My parents arrived at noon, my mother carrying a covered dish that smelled like pot roast. She stood in the yard looking up at the 2 of us on the roof and shook her head at something, though I couldn't tell what. We ate lunch at the old picnic table beside the barn. The one my grandfather had built from cedar so many years ago it had turned silver gray. My brother's kids ran around the yard. My father walked the fence line with his hands behind his back, checking for damage the way he always had. After lunch, my mother sat across from me at the table and was quiet for a while. "I want to understand it better," she said. "What you do?" "Okay. Not because I'm worried," she said. "I know you can take care of yourself. I want to understand it." I thought about how to explain it. I thought about all the times I'd tried and the conversation had gone sideways before I could get to the part that mattered. Then I thought about what my grandfather used to say. "Just tell me something you saw this week." "When a building collapses," I started, "there's a way the structure fails. Different materials fail differently. Different patterns. Part of my job is reading those patterns fast enough to know where it's safe to go and where it isn't." My mother was listening. Actually listening, with her eyes on my face and her hands still in her lap. I kept going. I talked for a while. She asked questions, not anxious questions, just curious ones. The way you ask questions when you're genuinely trying to understand someone's world. My brother came over and sat down at some point and listened without interrupting. I don't know how long we sat there. Long enough for the light to shift and the afternoon to get cold again, and for my father to come back from the fence line and pull up a chair. It didn't fix everything. That afternoon did not erase the years of silence or fill in the 14 months of not calling or make the words my brother had said in that conference room stop being words that had been said. Reconciliation isn't a single afternoon. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But something shifted. The way the ground shifts when frozen earth finally starts to thaw. Slow and fundamental and quiet. When they left as the sun was going down, my brother stopped at his truck and turned back. 2 weeks, he said. "I'll come back and we can do the east side of the roof." I said that worked. My mother looked at the house as she was getting in the car, taking in the front porch and the apple tree in the yard and the kitchen window where the light was on. She looked at it like she was memorizing it, or maybe like she was remembering it. She said, "It looks good, Claire. The place looks like someone's caring for it." "I am," I said. She got in the car, and they drove away down the gravel lane, and I stood there in the last of the daylight with my hands in my jacket pockets, watching the dust settle behind their taillights. My grandfather used to say that some of the best work you can do on a piece of land is just show up and pay attention. Give it what it needs. Come back when you can. Don't abandon it when it gets difficult. I think he was talking about more than land. I walked back up the porch steps. The door creaked when I opened it, the same as it always had. Inside, the floors still had his footprint in them, in the way old floors carry everyone who's ever walked them. The kitchen smelled like coffee and something like winter turning. I sat down at the table where he used to drink his tea. I had been gone a long time. The leaving had been necessary, and the coming back had been necessary, and the part in between had made me someone I hadn't been when I left. That was the truth of it. And the other truth, the one that lives right next to it, is that the people you grew up with deserve the chance to know who you became. Not as a performance, not as proof of anything, just as an honest accounting between people who share a name and a history and enough common ground to try again. If this story reminds you of someone, a sister, a brother, a daughter who stopped calling, maybe sit with that for a moment. People change in ways that don't always make the news. Sometimes the person you wrote off is carrying more than you ever knew. And sometimes the only thing standing between you and knowing them is the question you haven't asked yet. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you believe that families deserve second chances, stay with us. We'll be here.